November 18th, 1943. USS Ashland, somewhere in the Pacific, 200 miles northeast of Betio Island. The steel deck vibrates beneath 1,000 boots as Marines of the 2nd Division crowd the rails, staring down at the strangest vehicles they've ever seen. Ungainly boxes of riveted steel, each one looking like a bathtub welded to a tractor, bob in the swells alongside the transport ship. Water sloshes over their low gunwales. The LVT Alligators wallow in the waves like drunk hippopotamuses.
Swimming tractors, Corporal James McNally mutters to his fire team, shaking his head. Commands lost their goddamn minds. His squad leader, Sergeant William Bordelon, doesn't disagree. The scuttlebutt has been brutal for weeks. The LVT program, dreamed up by some engineer in Florida who'd watched rescue vehicles crawl through swamps, seemed like a death trap to men who'd trained their entire careers to leap from Higgins boats and sprint across beaches.
These contraptions moved at walking speed in water, couldn't dodge artillery, and their armor plating was thinner than a mess hall tray. One direct hit and 30 Marines would sink to the bottom in a steel coffin. Down in the transport hold, Lieutenant Robert L. Briscoe of the 2nd Amphibian Tractor Battalion runs his hand along the scarred hull of LVT-1 number 47. His vehicle, his responsibility. His crew of 3, driver, gunner, and himself as commander, had trained for 6 months with these beasts at Camp Pendleton. They'd coaxed the bulky Continental engines to life in California surf. They'd nursed the temperamental transmissions through countless breakdowns. They knew every squeak, every rattle, every weakness. The Marines who'd ride in back knew only fear. Briscoe had heard the jokes, the names, floating coffins, iron ducks, the worst one, alligator bait.
Marines believed the Japanese would sink these vehicles before they covered half the distance to shore. Conventional wisdom said you needed speed, maneuverability, and shallow draft, the Higgins boat's advantages. The LVT had none of these. What it had was tracks. Continuous tracks that could theoretically crawl over coral, through surf, and up onto beaches. Theoretically. The problem was Betio Island. Intelligence photographs showed a nightmare. A deep, steady narration with a calm but commanding tone. Slightly gravelly, mature voice that carries the weight of wartime history. Clear, deliberate pacing, never rushed, allowing tension to build naturally. Subtle emotional restraint, controlled intensity during dramatic moments, quieter and reflective during tragic ones. Cinematic, documentary-style delivery, with precise emphasis on key names, dates, and actions. A voice that sounds authoritative, historical, and inevitable. A coral reef extending 500 to 1,000 yards offshore, depending on tide. Reconnaissance indicated the reef would be exposed at low tide. Higgins boats would ground out hundreds of yards from the beach, forcing Marines to wade through chest-deep water under direct machine gun fire from Japanese pillboxes. Colonel David Shoup, commanding the assault troops, had seen the intelligence reports. He'd studied the tide tables obsessively. He'd argued with the naval planners about the timing. And he'd requested every available LVT, all 125 of them, to be in the first waves.
The Higgins boats would follow, but the LVTs would go first. Now, 48 hours before H-hour, Briscoe watches Marines file through the hold, their faces tight with barely concealed contempt as they inspect the vehicles that might carry them to the beach. One private runs his hand along the thin armor plating and looks at Briscoe. "This gonna stop a Jap bullet, sir?" Briscoe doesn't lie. "It'll stop small arms fire. Maybe. Anything bigger?" He trails off. They both know the answer. The private nods slowly, jaw set. "Guess we're all just praying for luck then." Briscoe thinks about the coral reef, about the tide, about 30 Marines crammed into the cargo bed behind him, trusting his ability to navigate through hell. He thinks about the Japanese defenders, 4,500 of them, dug into reinforced bunkers, with pre-sighted fields of fire covering every inch of that reef. The swimming tractors weren't perfect. They were barely adequate. But they could swim, and they could crawl over coral. In 48 hours, that might be the only thing that mattered. November 19th, 1943, 2100 hours. Wardroom, USS Maryland. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and tension as Colonel David Shoup stands before a scale model of Betio Island. The island looks insignificant, a sliver of coral barely 2 miles long and 800 yards across at its widest point. But every inch of that coral has been fortified by Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki's Special Naval Landing Forces over the past year. 1,400 yards of seawall, 40 artillery pieces. Hundreds of pillboxes and coconut log bunkers. 4,500 fanatical defenders who've been told the Americans cannot take this island. Shoup's finger traces the northern beaches. Red Beach 1, Red Beach 2, Red Beach 3. His voice is gravelly, worn from too many briefings and too little sleep. "Gentlemen, we have a problem. The tide." He points to the reef marked on the chart. This coral formation extends 500 to 1,000 yards offshore. Naval intelligence tells us we'll have 5 feet of water over the reef at H-hour, 0830 hours, enough for the Higgins boats to clear it. He pauses, and every officer in the room feels the weight of that pause. But the tide tables for this part of the Pacific are incomplete. The locals call it dodging tide, an unpredictable low tide that occurs irregularly. If it hits tomorrow, he doesn't finish. He doesn't need to. Every Marine in that room understands what chest-deep water means under direct fire from fortified positions. Major Henry Jim Crow, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, speaks up. "The Alligators, sir. How many do we have operational?" 75 LVTs will carry the first 3 waves, Shoup answers. Another 50 are designated for supply runs. That's every amphibious tractor in the Central Pacific Theater. He looks around the room. "Gentlemen, if those vehicles don't perform, if they can't get over that reef, we're going to lose a lot of Marines before we even reach the beach." Back on the Ashland, Briscoe and his fellow LVT commanders gather for their own briefing. Lieutenant Commander John B. Chappell, commanding officer of the 2nd Amphibian Tractor Battalion,
is a man who believes in his machines with almost religious fervor. He'd been present at Guadalcanal when a handful of LVTs had proven their worth in the Cocumbona operation. Now he stood before 125 vehicle commanders and spoke with absolute conviction. The Marines don't trust these vehicles. Command doesn't trust these vehicles. Hell, half of you probably don't trust these vehicles. A few scattered laughs. But here's what I know. Every Higgins boat out there draws 3 feet of water. If that reef is exposed, they ground out, period. But your LVTs draw nothing. You float, and when you hit coral, you crawl. He points to a diagram showing the LVT's track configuration. These roadless tracks were designed for swamp rescue. But coral is just rock. Your tracks will grab it. The Continental W670 engine puts out 250 horsepower, enough to push 10 tons over obstacles. You'll move at 4 knots in water, maybe 2 knots crawling over coral. That's walking speed. You'll be sitting ducks for Japanese artillery. The room is silent. But you'll be moving ducks, and you'll get those Marines to the beach. Briscoe returns to his vehicle and briefs his crew. Private First Class Robert Sherrod, a war correspondent embedded with the division, watches the preparation with a journalist's skeptical eye. He's seen the LVTs training, watched them wallow through practice runs. In his notebook, he's written, "These machines appear to be coffins with engines." Now he watches Briscoe's crew load. A deep, steady narration with a calm but commanding tone. Slightly gravelly, mature voice that carries the weight of wartime history. Clear, deliberate pacing, never rushed, allowing tension to build naturally. Subtle emotional restraint, controlled intensity during dramatic moments, quieter and reflective during tragic ones. Cinematic, documentary-style delivery with precise emphasis on key names, dates, and actions. A voice that sounds authoritative, historical, and inevitable. 50 caliber ammunition for the machine guns mounted on improvised pedestals. The LVTs had originally been designed as cargo haulers, not assault vehicles. Armor plating has been welded haphazardly to the sides. The crews have added whatever protection they can scrounge: sandbags, spare track sections, even mattresses. Corporal McNally's squad draws LVT number 47, Briscoe's vehicle. As they load their equipment, McNally watches the crew work with grudging respect. These tractor men aren't infantry. They're mechanics, drivers, technicians. But tomorrow, they'll drive straight into the teeth of the Japanese defenses, exposed in their open-topped boxes, unable to take cover, unable to fight back effectively. "You boys ever been under fire?" McNally asks Briscoe. "Once, Guadalcanal, light opposition." Briscoe checks the engine oil, doesn't look up. "Nothing like what we're facing tomorrow." McNally spits over the side. "Well, Lieutenant, I sure hope your swimming tractor can swim faster than I can drown." At 030 hours on November 20th, the Marines begin filing into their assigned LVTs, 30 men per vehicle, packed shoulder to shoulder, equipment clanking, weapons ready. The cargo bed is cramped, claustrophobic. Some men try to sleep, others check their rifles obsessively, a few pray quietly. Briscoe climbs into the commander's position, secured his helmet, and gives the order to his driver. The Continental engine coughs, sputters, then roars to life. Around them, 74 other engines start, a mechanical thunder that drowns out the sound of the surf. The first wave would consist of 42 LVTs hitting Red Beach 2 and Red Beach 3. The second and third waves would follow with the remaining tractors. At 050 hours, the naval bombardment begins. Battleships and cruisers hammer BTO with everything they have: 16-inch shells, 8-inch shells, a storm of high explosive that turns the pre-dawn darkness into flickering hell. For 2.5 hours, 3,000 tons of naval shells rain down on the tiny island. From his position in the LVT, Briscoe watches the island burn. Surely nothing could survive that bombardment. Surely the Japanese positions have been obliterated. He's wrong. November 20th, 1943, 08:30 hours, 4,000 yards offshore from Red Beach. The naval bombardment lifts. For 30 seconds, there is an eerie silence, broken only by the rumble of LVT engines and the slap of waves against steel hulls. Then the Japanese guns open up. The first shell screams overhead and detonates in the water 50 yards to Briscoe's right, sending up a geyser of white foam. Then another, and another. The Japanese had survived. Their reinforced bunkers, buried under tons of coral and concrete, had weathered the storm of naval shells, and now, as the sun breaks over the horizon, they can see their targets clearly. All vehicles advance to the line of departure. The order crackles over the radio. First wave, commence your run. Briscoe's LVT lurches forward. Around him, 41 other tractors form a ragged line and begin their crawl toward the beach. 4 knots, walking speed. The Marines in back crouch low, trying to make themselves small in the open cargo bed. There is no protection. The armor plating stops rifle rounds, but nothing larger. A near miss from an artillery shell sends shrapnel screaming over their heads. McNally's squad presses against the sides of the vehicle, faces tight with fear. "How long to the beach?" McNally shouts over the engine roar. Briscoe checks his watch, calculates. 15 minutes if we're lucky, 20 if we hit the reef. 20 minutes. An eternity under fire. The Japanese gunners find their range. LVT number 23, carrying Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins' Scout Sniper Platoon, takes a direct hit from a 75mm shell. The vehicle explodes in a ball of flame and black smoke, chunks of steel and bodies spinning through the air. 34 men gone in an instant. The surviving LVTs push forward through the debris field, tracks churning through water now mixed with oil and blood. 34 men, gone in an instant. A deep, steady narration, with a calm but commanding tone. Slightly gravelly, mature voice that carries the weight of wartime history. Clear, deliberate pacing, never rushed, allowing tension to build naturally. Subtle emotional restraint, controlled intensity during dramatic moments, quieter and reflective ones, cinematic, documentary-style delivery,
with precise emphasis on key names, dates, and actions. A voice that sounds authoritative, historical, and inevitable. At 1,000 yards from shore, Briscoe feels it, a grinding sensation through the hull. The tracks bite into something solid. Coral, the reef. "We're on it," his driver shouts, shifting to low gear. The LVT slows to a crawl, 2 knots. The tracks churn and grab, finding purchase on the jagged coral formations. The vehicle tilts at crazy angles, climbing over coral heads 3 feet high, dropping into depressions, but always moving forward, slowly, painfully slowly. Behind them, the second wave of Higgins boats reaches the reef line and stops. The dodging tide has come. Instead of 5 feet of water over the reef, there are only 3. Dozens of Higgins boats grind to a halt 500 yards from shore, their propellers churning uselessly in shallow water. The coxswains drop their ramps. Marines pour out and immediately sink into chest-deep water, weighed down by 70 pounds of combat gear. Robert Sherrod, the correspondent, is in one of those Higgins boats. He watches in horror as Marines ahead of him begin wading toward shore. Japanese machine gunners in the pillboxes have waited for this moment. Enfilading fire rakes the reef from multiple positions. Water erupts in neat lines as .30 caliber rounds chew through the exposed Marines. Men scream, men fall, the water turns red. Some try to use the coral heads for cover, but the Japanese have every inch pre-sighted. Others abandon their heavy equipment and try to swim, only to be shot in the water. A few make it to the seawall, exhausted, weaponless, traumatized. The slaughter is methodical, clinical. The Japanese gunners work in shifts, conserving ammunition, replacing hot barrels. They have all the time in the world. The Marines in the water are defenseless. But the LVTs keep moving. Briscoe's vehicle climbs over another coral head, tracks throwing up chunks of dead coral and shells. He can see the beach now, 200 yards ahead. The seawall, pillboxes spitting fire. Marines from earlier waves pinned down behind logs and debris. His vehicle takes small arms fire continuously, rounds pinging off the armor. The gunner on the .50 caliber returns fire, traversing across visible enemy positions. 100 yards, Briscoe shouts into his radio. Prepare to disembark. The Marines in back ready themselves. They've watched their brothers die in the water. They've seen the Higgins boats strand themselves on the reef. But this ungainly, mocked, derided swimming tractor has carried them over that killing ground. McNally meets Briscoe's eyes for just a moment. There's no contempt there now, only grim respect. At 0910 hours, LVT number 47 grinds up onto Red Beach 2. The tracks bite into sand. Briscoe drops the ramp. Go! 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 30 Marines pour out and sprint for the seawall, diving behind whatever cover they can find. Japanese fire follows them, but they're moving, fighting, alive. Behind them,
More LVTs crawl over the reef, delivering their human cargo directly onto the beach. The swimming tractors have become life rafts in a sea of death. November 20th, 1943. 09:45 hours. Red Beach 2, Betio Island. The seawall offers scant protection. 3 feet of coconut logs and coral, pocked with gaps where Japanese artillery has blown through. Colonel Shoup crouches behind it, blood streaming from shrapnel wounds in his leg, watching his attack dissolve into chaos. Of the 5,000 Marines committed to the first 3 waves, fewer than 1,500 have made it ashore intact. The rest are dead in the water, wounded on the reef, or pinned down in Higgins boats that have become floating coffins. But the LVTs keep coming. Briscoe's vehicle has already made the return trip, back over the reef, back to the transfer line where more Marines wait in stranded Higgins boats. Now he's loading wounded for evacuation, cramming bloodied men into the cargo bed alongside ammunition crates. A corpsman shoves a plasma bottle into his hand. Get him to a transport. He's got maybe 30 minutes. The engine roars to life. The tracks bite sand, and LVT number 47 begins its 3rd trip across the killing ground. The Japanese have adjusted their fire. They've learned that the LVTs are the Americans' lifeline, and every gun on the island that can traverse to the reef is now targeting the tractors. Briscoe's vehicle takes a hit from a 37mm gun that punches through the thin armor and kills his gunner instantly. The .50 caliber falls silent. They keep moving. Sergeant Bourdillon, who'd questioned the swimming tractors 2 days ago, is now organizing Marines to retrieve supplies from LVTs as they arrive. He watches LVT number 31 take a direct hit from a 75mm shell, disintegrating in a fireball that sends track sections cartwheeling through the air. The crew of 3 and 12 wounded Marines die before they can scream. "We need every tractor we can get," Bourdillon shouts to a runner. "Tell command we're out of ammunition, water, plasma, everything." By 1100 hours, the situation is critical. Major Crow's battalion is pinned against the seawall, taking casualties from Japanese positions that the naval bombardment barely scratched. The only Marines making progress are those delivered directly by LVT. They hit the beach with their equipment, their ammunition, their cohesion intact. Lieutenant Hawkins, who survived the destruction of his original LVT, leads his scout snipers in a desperate assault on a Japanese strongpoint. They take it after 20 minutes of savage close-quarters fighting. Hawkins stands on top of the bunker, directing fire, until a burst from a hidden machine gun cuts him down. He'll die of his wounds the next day, posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The Marines stuck on the reef watch the LVTs with desperate envy. Private Carl Matthews has been in chest-deep water for 3 hours, using a dead Marine's body for cover. He's seen men drown, seen men shot while trying to swim, seen men simply give up and let the tide take them. When LVT number 52 crawls past him, its commander, a young lieutenant whose name Matthews never learns, stops long enough to pull 6 Marines from the water. "Grab the sides, we'll tow you." Matthews and 5 others cling to the vehicle's hull as it grinds toward shore, Japanese bullets whipping the water around them. 2 lose their grip and fall away. 4 make it. The lieutenant doesn't even look back, just keeps driving, keeps moving forward. By noon, the mathematics of survival become clear. If you're in an LVT, your chances of reaching the beach alive are about 70%. If you're in a Higgins boat stranded on the reef, your chances drop to less than 30%. Some Marines who've made it to shore wade back out into the water, swimming to stranded boats to guide men toward the few gaps in the reef where the water is deep enough to wade without drowning. The LVT crews work without rest. Briscoe has made 4 trips by 1,300 hours. His vehicle is riddled with bullet holes. One track is damaged and squealing with every revolution, and his crew has been reduced to himself and the driver after both gunners were killed. But the engine still runs. The tracks still turn. One more run, his driver says, face blackened with powder smoke and oil. Then we get a new crew, patch this beast, and go again. Briscoe looks back at the reef, at the bodies floating in the shallows, at the Higgins boats sitting uselessly on the coral like beached whales. He thinks about the Marines who'd mocked these vehicles, called them death traps, predicted they'd sink before reaching shore. Yeah, he says quietly, one more run. The swimming tractors had become the only thing standing between victory and catastrophe. November 20th. 1943, 1,500 hours. The Pocket, Red Beach 3. Major Michael Ryan has carved out a foothold on the western end of the island with barely 200 Marines. A mixed group from different units who've coalesced around the only officer showing forward momentum. They've pushed 100 yards inland, but they're cut off, surrounded on 3 sides by Japanese positions. Their only lifeline is the LVTs. Every 30 minutes, a swimming tractor grinds up onto the beach in Ryan's sector, disgorging ammunition, water, and reinforcements. The crews don't even shut down their engines. They unload, load wounded, and immediately head back across the reef. It's a rhythm that keeps Ryan's Pocket alive. Staff Sergeant William Bordelone has become a legend in these desperate hours. Wounded twice, he continues organizing supply runs from the LVTs, directing traffic on the beach like he's managing a loading dock instead of a killing field. When a Japanese pillbox threatens to collapse Ryan's perimeter, Bordelone charges it alone with demolition charges. He destroys the position, but takes a burst of machine gun fire that tears through his chest. He dies insisting his men take cover first. On the reef, the situation remains a nightmare. The tide hasn't risen. Marines continue wading through the killing zone in scattered groups. Some follow the paths marked by LVT tracks in the coral. At least those routes are proven passable. Others try to swim around the flanks and are picked off by snipers in damaged landing craft that the Japanese have turned into shooting platforms. Corporal McNally, who reached the beach in Briscoe's first run, now helps coordinate LVT landings. He's developed a grudging expertise in which parts of the beach offer the best cover for vehicles, where the Japanese artillery can't quite reach, where Marines can unload with minimal exposure. When LVT number 47 comes grinding back for its 8th run of the day, McNally recognizes it immediately. The distinctive bullet hole pattern on the bow, the damaged right track. "Jesus, Lieutenant, how's this thing still running?"
McNally shouts as Briscoe's vehicle beaches. Briscoe looks like a ghost, face gray with exhaustion, uniform soaked in seawater, oil, and other men's blood. Pure spite, he says, then grins without humor. And a good mechanic. His driver, Private First Class Thomas Kincaid, has kept the Continental engine running through shrapnel damage, a cracked fuel line, and a cooling system held together with wire and prayer. Between runs, he's performed repairs while floating in open water, Japanese shells landing close enough to drench him with spray. By 1700 hours, the Marines hold 3 precarious footholds on Betio, Ryan's Pocket in the west, Crow's battered battalion clinging to the seawall in the center, and a small group under Major William K. Jones on the eastern end. None of these positions would exist without the LVTs. Of the 75 tractors that started the day, 35 are destroyed or disabled. The remaining 40 continue their runs, crews operating on adrenaline and determination. Colonel Shoup, still directing the battle from his shell hole command post behind the seawall, watches an LVT crawl past carrying its 10th load of the day. He thinks about the skepticism, the mockery, the predictions of disaster. He thinks about the Higgins boats, still stranded on the reef, their crews helpless. He makes a decision that will be radioed to Admiral Kelly Turner within the hour. All subsequent waves will be landed by amphibious tractor only. No more Higgins boats until the tide rises or we secure the reef approaches. It's an admission that conventional amphibious doctrine has failed. The swimming tractors, the ungainly, slow, vulnerable machines that nobody trusted, have become the only viable way to assault a defended coral atoll. As darkness falls on the first day of the Battle of Tarawa, the LVTs make their final runs. They've delivered over 3,000 Marines to the beach, evacuated more than 500 wounded, and brought forward tons of ammunition and supplies. They've suffered 40% casualties among their crews. They've been mocked, derided, and dismissed. But they've crawled over the reef that stopped everything else. And they've kept the 2nd Marine Division in the fight. November 21st, 1943. 06:30 hours. Red Beach 2. Dawn breaks over a beach transformed into an abattoir. Bodies lie in windrows along the seawall. The sand is no longer white coral, but rust red, churned into a paste of blood and pulverized bone. The stench of death hangs heavy, cordite, burning fuel, and decomposing flesh in the tropical heat. Marines who've survived the night lie in shell holes, drinking fetid water from their canteens, watching the reef through bloodshot eyes. The LVTs begin their runs before first light. Lieutenant Briscoe hasn't slept. None of the tractor crews have. Between runs, they've performed hasty repairs by moonlight, welding patches over shrapnel holes, replacing damaged tracks, coaxing failing engines back to life. LVT number 47 has been patched so many times it looks like a quilt made of steel. The driver's position is now occupied by Private First Class Eugene Tseng. Kincaid caught a sniper's bullet during the last run of the previous day and bled out before they could get him to a transport. Tseng is a mechanic, not a combat driver, but he's all Briscoe has left. Just keep her straight, Briscoe tells him. The tracks will do the rest. The second day brings reinforcements. The 6th Marines, held in reserve, finally committed to the slaughter. But they face the same problem: the reef. The tide remains stubbornly low. Higgins boats continue to ground out 500 yards from shore. The only way forward is in the remaining 40 LVTs, now supplemented by desperate improvisation. Some Marines wade in, holding on to cargo nets being towed by tractors. Others float ammunition boxes ahead of them like life preservers. The reef approaches become a gauntlet, where ingenuity and luck determine survival. Major Ryan's pocket has expanded. Supplied by continuous LVT runs, his force has pushed to the southern shore of the island, splitting the Japanese defenses. The swimming tractors deliver flamethrower fuel, demolition charges, and fresh troops directly to his position every hour. Each delivery tips the tactical balance further in the Marines' favor. On Red Beach 3, Major Crow organizes a coordinated assault on the massive bomb-proof shelters that anchor the Japanese defense. The attack requires 200 Marines moving simultaneously with heavy weapons. How do you concentrate 200 Marines for an assault when conventional landing craft can't reach the beach? The LVTs make 4 trips in rapid succession, delivering entire platoons with their machine guns, mortars, and anti-tank weapons intact. The assault succeeds. By 1400 hours on November 21st, the Marines control half the island. The Japanese respond with desperate counterattacks. A deep, steady narration with a calm but commanding tone. Slightly gravelly, mature voice that carries the weight of wartime history. Clear, deliberate pacing, never rushed, allowing tension to build naturally. Subtle emotional restraint. Controlled intensity during dramatic moments, quieter and reflective during tragic ones. Cinematic, documentary-style delivery, with precise emphasis on key names, dates, and actions. A voice that sounds authoritative, historical, and inevitable. At 4:00 hours on November 22nd, 300 Japanese troops launch a banzai charge against the Marine positions. They break through in several places, penetrating to within yards of Colonel Shoup's command post. The fighting becomes savage hand-to-hand combat in the darkness. Bayonets, entrenching tools, knives. Marines and Japanese soldiers grapple in shell holes, struggling for weapons, for life. The LVTs can't operate effectively in darkness. Their commanders can't see the coral heads, can't navigate by landmarks that have been obliterated. But as dawn breaks, they resume their runs immediately, bringing ammunition to Marines who fired every round in repelling the night attack. The counterattack has failed, leaving windrows of Japanese dead. But it's bought time for the defenders to reorganize their remaining strongpoints. Lieutenant Hawkins dies this morning, his wounds from the first day finally claiming him. Sergeant Bordelon is already dead. Hundreds of others have joined them. But the Marines continue to push forward, supplied and reinforced by the tractors that nobody believed would work. Corporal McNally finds himself back in LVT number 47 for an assault on a stubborn Japanese bunker complex. Briscoe's vehicle has become a battlefield legend, the tractor that won't die. McNally sits in the cargo bed next to 20 other Marines, most of them from different units, all of them thrown together by the chaos of battle. "Remember 2 days ago when you boys were calling these things death traps?" one Marine shouts over the engine roar. McNally spits over the side. "I was wrong. I'll buy every tractor crew a beer if we get off this god-forsaken island." The LVT grinds over the reef for what must be its 30th trip. The Continental engine is burning oil, leaving a blue-gray smoke trail. One track squeals with every revolution. The armor plating is so riddled with holes it looks like Swiss cheese, but it keeps moving. By 1300 hours on November 23rd, 76 hours after the first wave hit the beach, organized Japanese resistance collapses. The remaining defenders retreat to the eastern tail of the island, where they'll be hunted down over the next day. Marines raise the American flag over a shattered coconut tree that barely qualifies as a flagpole. The Battle of Tarawa is over. The butcher's bill is staggering. 1,009 Marines killed, 2,100 wounded, nearly 5,000 Japanese and Korean laborers dead, an entire island transformed into a graveyard. But the 2nd Marine Division holds BTO Island. The Central Pacific Drive can continue. And 40 battered, shot-up, barely functional LVTs still idle on the beach, their engines running, ready for one more trip if needed.
November 24th, 1943. Red Beach 2, Betio Island. The guns have fallen silent. Marines wander through the wreckage in a daze, stepping over bodies, Japanese and American alike, that lie in grotesque poses of violent death. The air still reeks of cordite and decay. Flies swarm in black clouds. War correspondent Robert Sherrod walks the beach, his notebook filled with observations that will shock America when they're published. But what catches his attention now are the LVTs. 38 vehicles sit on the beach or idle in the shallows, their crews performing maintenance with methodical exhaustion. These machines look like they've been through hell, because they have. Sherrod counts the bullet holes in LVT number 47, over 200 impacts on the hull alone. The armor plating is bent, torn, patched with welded steel plates. One track is held together with wire. The engine coughs black smoke with every revolution. Lieutenant Briscoe sits on the bow, helmet off, face hollow with exhaustion. He's made 34 trips across the reef in 3 days. He's lost 2 crew members killed, 1 wounded. He's watched other LVTs explode, sink, burn. But his vehicle still runs. "Lieutenant," Sherrod says quietly, "mind if I ask you something?" Briscoe looks up, eyes red-rimmed. "Sure." 2 days ago, most of the Marines I talked to called these tractors death traps, floating coffins. What do you say to that now? Briscoe is silent for a long moment. Around him, other LVT crews work on their vehicles, welding, hammering, cursing engines that refuse to die. Finally, he speaks. "They were right. These are death traps. Slow, under-armored, under-gunned. But they're death traps that float, death traps that crawl over coral. And when conventional landing craft ground out 500 yards from shore," he gestures at the reef where dozens of Higgins boats still sit stranded, "we kept moving." Corporal McNally approaches, carrying a case of beer he somehow scrounged from a supply depot. "I owe you boys a drink," he says simply. "Every Marine who made it to this beach alive came in one of these things." The statistics tell the story with brutal clarity.
Of the approximately 5,000 Marines landed in the first 3 waves, roughly 1,500 came ashore in LVTs and reached the beach with minimal casualties. The remaining 3,500 attempted to wade from grounded Higgins boats. Of these, over 1,000 became casualties on the reef itself, killed or wounded before ever reaching the fight. The LVTs had made the difference between disaster and costly victory. Colonel Shoup, limping from his wounds, tours the beach on November 25th as the cleanup begins. He stops at each surviving LVT, shaking hands with crews who haven't slept in 4 days. At LVT number 47, he finds Briscoe supervising repairs. "Lieutenant, how many trips did you make?" "34, sir. Would have been more, but we had to stop for repairs." Shoup looks at the battered vehicle, then at the young officer.
You know what this means, don't you? Every amphibious operation from here to Tokyo is going to require these machines. You've just rewritten the doctrine. He's right. The lessons of Tarawa spread through the Marine Corps like wildfire. The swimming tractors, mocked, derided, dismissed as experimental curiosities, become the centerpiece of amphibious warfare. Within months, production ramps up. New models are designed. The LVT-2 with better engines, the LVT-A1 with a 37mm gun turret for fire support, eventually the LVT-4 with a stern ramp for faster unloading. At Saipan, Guam, Palaleu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, LVTs will lead every assault wave. The Marines will perfect the tactics, waves of armored amphibious tractors carrying troops directly onto the beach, supported by gunboat LVTs providing covering fire, followed by supply LVTs keeping the assault forces sustained. The Higgins boat remains in service, but only for operations where coral reefs aren't a factor.
The swimming tractor becomes an icon. But for the men who crewed them at Tarawa, vindication comes too late for some, and at too high a cost for all. Of the 125 LVT crew members who began the battle, 35 are dead and 47 wounded. The survival rate for tractor crews was lower than for the infantry they carried. They couldn't take cover, couldn't fight back effectively, couldn't abandon their vehicles when targeted by Japanese artillery. Private First Class Eugene Sang, who replaced the fallen Kincaid as Briscoe's driver on the second day, will survive the war and become a mechanic in peacetime. He'll name his first son after the Continental W670 engine that kept running when it should have died. Lieutenant Briscoe receives the Navy Cross for his actions at Tarawa. He'll go on to command an LVT company at Saipan, where he'll die leading an assault on Japanese positions. He's 23 years old. Corporal McNally survives Tarawa and fights through the rest of the Central Pacific campaign. After the war, he'll track down surviving LVT crew members and organize reunions. He'll spend the rest of his life telling anyone who'll listen, "Those boys in the swimming tractors saved my life." LVT number 47 is eventually scrapped for parts after Tarawa, too damaged to repair, too worn out to continue. But photographs of it, bullet-riddled and defiant, appear in training manuals and historical accounts. It becomes the symbol of an ungainly, unlikely machine that proved critics wrong when it mattered most. The Battle of Tarawa teaches the American military many lessons, most of them written in blood. But perhaps the most important lesson is this:
Sometimes the mocked, derided, impossible solution becomes the only thing that works. The swimming tractors rolled over Tarawa's coral reef and into history.